Okay guys, I hope I get it this time. So this is my third time trying to make this video. I've decided that maybe editing on my phone is a bad idea. It only took me 3 times to figure it out. All right guys, I'm Shane. Thanks for coming back by and checking out Shane Car Junkie. A lot of you guys have been following the CNC motor story that broke about a month ago when I reached out to Dan over at Normal Guy Supercar, and Dan did us all in the car community a huge solid. He decided to go ahead and interview me, and ultimately Dan lent me his platform where I went on for about 20 minutes or so talking about my experiences with the owner, Clayton Tom over at CNC Motors. So really briefly, I bought the car from them after about a year of having to go through tons of debugging the car, a lot of issues. I was sold a car that I was told had been fully inspected and PPI'd. And this car needed the transmission to get rebuilt, the F1 pump, the headers were cracked, all sorts of issues with the car. Now granted, CNC Motors took care of most of the work. I had to pay about $10 out of pocket for the work I had done to it. And ultimately, once the car was running smooth, I decided to consign it because my wife and I were looking to move out of California to a very snowy climate, and I thought maybe it's time I get an all-wheel drive car. So CNC Motors, being a large and well-known outfit, I put the car on consignment with them. And if you want to hear in detail what happened with that, please, the whole story is over on Normal Guy Supercar, where Dan has interviewed me. He actually interviews the owner of CNC Motors, and he's got some other customer testimonies as well as some opinions from other people who formerly worked for agencies or newspapers. He's done a great job at thoroughly covering this. It would be a huge thank you to Dan, and a big favor to me if you wouldn't mind going over to his channel, subscribing to Normal Guy Supercar, watch some of his videos, give him some thumbs up and likes on them, and comment in the comment section. See, this isn't what I do for a living. I'm having a bit of fun doing it, albeit the circumstances sucked. And it's pretty entertaining for me, but I do other things for a living. Dan does this for a living, and he's got a great website business he's got set up where he sells parts for your supercars as well as accessories for your garage, and he has consulting services. Speaking of the consulting services, just to clear a few things up, that is actually how I met Dan. I had been a fan of Dan's channel, and he would talk about finance and what he did for a living and how he was able to afford his used supercar and all this stuff. And it was a very interesting channel for me because he touched a lot on subjects that interest me: finance, startup, entrepreneurship, and of course, supercar ownership and experience for the normal guy. And when Dan had mentioned that he was a consultant with startup companies, I had started a business. I wanted to get it up and running on the internet with a e-commerce business. So I wrote Dan a quick email introducing myself, letting him know that I'm a fan of the channel and also a fellow Ferrari owner. I've got this business and I could use his consulting service. So I consulted with Dan about my e-commerce side of my business, and all of his services were able to render exactly what he promised me. So who knew that a year later that I'd be reaching back out to him and telling him about this catastrophe of a situation over at CNC Motors. And initially, Dan didn't necessarily believe me. He didn't take it on face value. So I showed him a number of stories that I'd pulled off some sites where people were complaining about them, and I finally sent Dan over the thread of text messages that had gone back and forth between me, Clay, and the salesman over at CNC Motors. Once he saw all that, plus the other customer complaints, he felt that he had to do something. So instead of just interviewing me, he decided to lend me his platform, as he's not a journalist. And that's where you hear about my story. Now, there's more to it than that, and the reason I'm bringing so much of this up is, A, I want you to go over and support Dan over at Normal Guy Supercar if you don't mind. I really don't care if you follow me here or not. If you find what I do interesting, great, but I have no aspirations to make a living off of this. And I just want to support Dan because of the risk he took. And also, if you go over to his channel, it tells the whole story as far as what I went through, as well as hearing from other individuals who have knowledge of the case and people who are also victims of CNC Motors. So please, the guy deserves all the support he can get. Plus, when we're watching the videos and YouTube is suggesting them in the algorithm, it's perhaps reaching other people who aren't aware that they may have bought one of these cars or may potentially be in possession of a car that somebody may be coming for. This is a sticky mess involving a lot of people. The participation from the audience here on YouTube actually helped me get my car back. Somebody had some information that after, I think it was the second video I had done where I sent Dan a random video and saying, hey, if you want to use this, use it. And he felt that it was important enough that he put my second video up. Well, I'm glad he did, because after that second video, somebody who recognized the car passed Dan some information, which got to me. And ultimately, I took that information and gave it to a family friend of ours, and he was able to get me the name and address, multiple addresses of the gentleman who had my car. Now, for the purpose of this video and explaining the outcome of this, we're going to call this gentleman Mr. Smith. And Mr. Smith was not too happy when I got a hold of him. So now that I've plugged in and sort of done the intro to this, let's take a quick break to give you a second to go over to Normal Guy Supercars, subscribe, watch a few videos, then come back and listen to me babble. I'll wait. Hey, you're back. Cool. All right, so you guys want to know how this all wrapped up. So I had been working on Clay for a while. Clay and I had had a lot of back and forth, and the whole situation sort of unfolded with YouTube and Dan and some stuff that I've been doing over on Instagram and on Facebook and on Twitter, and I was all over the place. I had basically walked out of my job. I told my staff I won't be back for as long as this takes. It took 38 days to get my car once I quit working. Up to that point, I'd spent 3 months sort of part-time going after it, only to get, lied to by Clay or get a bad check or have a bad check sent to my bank. It was a total fiasco. So as all this was hitting Clay was starting to communicate with me almost every couple hours. He knew that I was behind what was going on the internet to some degree, but he didn't know how little or how much. So I pretty much just decided to let his own imagination kind of F with him. I would send him some photos and some pictures that I had been down to a YouTube creator studio out here in LA, and that I was actually at YouTube corporate. And then I would send him another video saying that I was at a local radio station getting interviewed. And the thing is I work in entertainment and production, so I have a vast amount of resources, and he freaking believed it. But it was like he wanted to pay, but he always felt that there was room to buy more time with me. This is where it gets interesting. That whole situation with Dan, where I got that phone number, right, through the private eye. When I reached out to the gentleman who had my car, I called him, I was like, Mr. Smith, I represent the interest of that 2008 Ferrari F430 that you have sitting in your warehouse. And he was immediately like, who are you? How'd you get this number? How do you know where that car is stored? And I told him, I said, Mr. Smith, I am the rightful owner of that vehicle, and I have every intention of coming to get it. And he was very quick to explain, don't you dare. That car was owned by CNC Motors. They told me that was their car. That was not a consignment car. And I told him, I have proof that that is my car. I still have a loan on that has not been satisfied. As a matter of fact, I can show you the statement where he bounced a check to my bank, and I effectively rescinded the contract to consign, and I'm coming for the car. And he said, you're not going to get that car. I'm not giving the car up. And I told him, I said, Mr. Smith, you've got to understand this isn't a personal attack on you. But that gentleman has sold you a car that is not his to sell. And I'm going to go to my bank tomorrow, and I'm going to buy my title from the bank. I told them that the bank was insisting that I either satisfy the loan or that car comes back to my possession. If you're refusing to put the car back in my possession, and you're going to force me to have to satisfy a loan on a car that you have, I'm coming for the car. And I would ultimately get it, even if it meant I had to take the extreme measure of having him arrested by the local police for being in possession of stolen property. I explained to him how I was going to do it. I was going to buy my title, and then I was simply going to report the car stolen in Upland, California, take that stolen car report to the local police in his town, and demand that they arrest that gentleman and allow me to retrieve my vehicle. Well, he didn't like the way I was talking to him, and we kind of went at it for the first day and a half. But finally, cooler heads prevailed because I asked him a simple question. I said, Mr. Smith, why are we fighting? Why wouldn't we decide to be allies versus adversaries? We've got clay to ruin our lives. We don't need to ruin each other's lives. And cooler heads prevailed, and we finally sat down and we hatched a plan. I told him basically what we had just put him through over on YouTube, but I also showed him the backstory. What had been going on Instagram, what had been happening on Facebook, what had been happening on Twitter and across the internet, who I had leaked information to, who I was communicating with, how many agencies were involved. I explained to him, this is my full-time job now. I am not doing anything else until that car is back with me, plain and simple. So I hatched a plan with him, very similar to what Dan and I did the trick clay. We decided to go for round 2 with clay. Now I was already tormenting him with what he thought I was doing on the internet, and he was essentially begging me to stop. At one point he called me and said, Shane, what does it take to make this go away? And I said, I just want the car back. He says, listen, I can't get you the car back. It's a very complicated situation. It's going to cost my company hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it back. Here's what I'll do, Shane, please. I'm going to leave you a $160,000 to $180,000 car with title to hold on to, Shane, because I trust you, Shane. I trust that you'll take care of the car and you won't hurt her to sell it, because that's how much I care about you as a customer, Shane. I'm going to leave you with this car, and I'm going to give you an extra $20,000 over what you were asking in equity for the car. Shane, will you do that? I just need some time to come up with that money. I'll have you your loaner car. I'll put it with you with title. I'll write you a promissory note. And basically, you're going to sell your car and you're going to walk away with almost 50 grand in your pocket, and you're going to have a nice exotic car to drive around and use as long as it takes me to pay you back. And I was like, man, I don't know what game you're playing, Clay. I don't want to be involved with what you're doing. And he's getting up. So what do you want from me? I said, Clay, I just want you to do what you said you would do. And when the car didn't sell and I said, don't sell it, you should have just given it back. So right now what I want is I want my effing car back, and I want you out of my life. I'm sorry I ever met you. I'm sorry I ever bought that car from you. All the glitz and glamour of your dealership was a lie. You are a shallow, broken man, and I want to get my car back before the frenzy comes to eat you alive, man. I cannot believe you still have your teeth and you can walk. The people you're messing around with, and this is our livelihood for some of us. These are big investments for us. And you're complaining about COVID and how much money, that you lost $17 million. Man, my companies have been sitting dormant for over a year, and I'm not screwing my customers spending their money on me. Clay, you need to pay me. And so basically, but the demand was I wanted the car back. So he was so frustrated that I wasn't letting go of it, that when I got a hold of the other guy, I told him about this whole conversation and the intensity of what was going on. And even at one point, I'd convinced Clay to let me come in and run his social media at his company, and he let me. That's actually how I secured the interview between Clay and Dan. A lot of you may not know this. Clay reached out to Dan wanting to do an interview, but Clay was sort of wishy-washy. Well, Dan knew that I'd sort of friended Clay and was giving him some business advice on how to recover from this seemingly embarrassing situation. That was part of the trick that I was playing on Clay. I would sit in his office, I met his wife, I got to know his kids. They're all very nice people. He was digging a hole deeper every day, and they thought their dad was just doing the same old thing, I suppose. I told him about all these tricks and all this torment I was putting Clay through and confusing him, and basically encouraged him to play along because it was working. Listen, Clay can't know that we're talking. He can't know that I figured out who you are because he won't tell me who you are. And I told him about the extra money, and this just infuriated the guy even more. But I did ask him, I said, listen, before we do this, how come you just won't get the car back? I'm curious, why won't you give an inch? And he says, well, because then I won't get paid the money I'm owed. And I was like, oh, okay, there's more to the story. And I said, well, Mr. Smith, what's going on? Well, he says, well, I put a very nice high-line luxury Mercedes with him on consignment when I had come in and actually seen your Ferrari for sale. So I told him, hey, when the Mercedes sells, I'll take my equity from that, and I'd like to buy that 2008 Ferrari sitting over there. So with that, he put his car on consignment with Clay. only to find out a couple months later that the bank was wondering why he stopped making payments on the car. And then he too found out that CNC Motors had sold his Mercedes, not paid the bank off, released the car without a title to an unsuspecting buyer somewhere out there in the world of car ownership, and he was left making a payment on a car he didn't know where it was, and he didn't know how to get in touch with who had the car, because guess what? CNC Motors wouldn't tell them. So now it made sense to me. He was holding my car for leverage to get paid on the car that he hadn't been paid on, or get his car back. So I said, this is a perfect scenario. If you start saying the things that I'm saying to Clay, he's going to think that this is really happening. So I would tell him, hey, tell Clay that so-and-so from this social media site reached out to you and they're going to do an interview with you. And he would write it down. And I said, text me when you have that conversation with them. And he did. And like 4 hours later, I would text Clay, go, hey, Clay, I just got, contacted by another reporter. You know what? I'm just going to take this whole story public. You're making me wait too long. I need my car back. I'm getting really frustrated. And he would plead with me not to. Well, when me and Mr. Smith started tagging him with it, and then I kept sending him photos of like, hey, I got called in by this law enforcement agency, and I would send a picture of the front of the building. Those pictures actually just came off of Google Earth. I never went to these places. So Clay thought that Mr. Smith and I were talking to detectives from one agency, investigators from another agency, investigators from fraud departments at banks and all this stuff. And I was sending them all these shots that were just screenshots that were photoshopped to look like they were taken from inside of a car, a fast moving car, or like we were standing in front of the building. So I would do little things like did this one picture where I took a picture of myself in my own reflection out in front of my office. And then I took the picture of the Department of Motor Vehicles where you file the complaint out in Riverside. And I took a picture of that, and I sort of morphed the two pictures together where it looked like I was taking a picture of my reflection holding my cell phone next to the suite number in the office of the Department of DMV Fraud Investigation and the Highway Patrol. And Clay would, but don't go in there, don't do that. I was like, oh man, there's a lot of people here, and I just keep hearing CNC Motors over and over. And then I told Mr. Smith to do the same thing, that he got called out to Riverside. I sent him a picture that he could send to Clay to prove that he was there. And the reason why we did this picture thing is because it was a trick of Clay's very own. Clay invented the trick. Clay would send us pictures of a check. Look I just got this huge check I'm at the bank depositing it now. And then 10 minutes, see, I told you I had money. You guys are just harassing me for nothing. I'll have your check tomorrow. And then the next day he'd send a picture of a check, and then he'd say, come out and get your check tomorrow. And of course you'd get there and, oh, we can't give you the check right now. Or the person who had the check, they've got, the virus and all this stuff. So Mr. Smith and I were just tagging him with all these false lines, all these false intentions, but Clay was believing it. And the real sucker punch was I finally, Mr. Smith and I were tagging team pretty good, and Mr. Smith kind of, I don't want to say it was an accident. He was growing frustrated, so he finally said, Clay, the guy who owns that car got a hold of me, and it almost blew the whole thing, because Clay then began to suspect that maybe he and I were talking. And that's where I was like, Mr. Smith, you kind of screwed us here, so I'm going to have to just pull like the ultimate prank here. I'm going to convince him that I'm going to be on a live interview with 8 of the biggest content creator and automotive journalists in the industry. And I'll put the picture here. I built this set in my office. I set up all these monitors, these computers. I went out and bought extra microphones, and I convinced Clay that I was going live with the biggest of the biggest in the business of automotive journalism and YouTubers and Instagram creators. And this story was going to be on live the next day. And he finally said, fine, you win. You're putting me out of business. You're killing my company. Why are you doing this to me? And I said, Clay, and one of his texts said, I didn't do anything to you. I am responding to what you did to me and what you're doing to so many other people. Mr. Tom, you have screwed with the wrong person. I will not let this go. I will not go back to work. I'm not letting that car go. I'm not letting you get away with this. I don't want your money. I don't want to play your game. And he's like, fine, what do I need? And I said, it ends tomorrow. You have 24 hours to wire Mr. Smith all the money he spent on my car, payments, his down payment, his balance due on the car that you sold of his, the Mercedes, and you need to get that title to the gentleman who has the Mercedes. All three people need to be cleared out of this. And he's like, what do you want? You've got to want something out of this. You know, is normal guy supercar paying you? It's like, dude, I didn't even know that guy. I met that guy for like 2 hours one time, paid him for his services, and have just been a follower of his channel. I called him to warn people to do their homework before doing business with a prick like you. Why would you do that to me? I'm a family man. I was like, because you're effing with my family, dude. You're messing with what the money me and Mr. Smith have invested in these cars. This is supposed to be fun, you prick. These are supposed to be a moment to indulge a little and take our mind off of what's going on in the world and just go enjoy a drive in a cool car. And you have made it the most aggravating and miserable experience possible. On top of it, while there's a global sickness spreading through the world, I've got to worry about a car instead of my family, instead of my job. I've got to put that on my plate too. You a-hole. You freaking selfish a-hole. You're lucky you got your teeth, man. And so finally he's like, fine. I just need 2 more weeks. I said, you don't have 2 more weeks. And I sent him a full script and a cast and crew call sheet and a production schedule. I had convinced him that we had begun filming a documentary for a very big streaming service that everybody knows about. And by this time, he knew that I worked direct with producers and live event folks. And so he wasn't doubting me anymore. It's of his other customers knew who I was. And it was like, that guy's not messing with you. He has the ability to do what he's going to do. And so finally, he called and he caves and he's like, fine. I'll do everything you're asking for. I said, not so quick. If there's any problems with that car, it's on you. And I'll wait till they're done filleting your ass and I'll be back for you. Once you've thought you've paid everything, expect a phone call from me and then we'll settle up. And he says, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, you're going to wire that money to the bank today. And I don't care what you have to do. That wire needs to come off and be deposited directly into Mr. Smith's account. And until the funds are in his account, he's not giving me the car. And if you don't do it in 24 hours, I promise you I'm going to make good on everything I just told you was going to happen. The pictures, the videos, all this is going to go live. And up until today, up until he sees this video, Clay had no idea that he'd been gamed. He had no idea we were playing the player while we were playing the player. And it felt good. It was a waste of time, but for the end result, or when I called Mr. Smith and said the deal's going through, he thanked me and that was worth it. And we've even talked about potentially selling that car to him in the future, but I figured I went through so much hell to get the car, and the car actually now needs a very major repair done on it. The engine's got to come out and the top end's got to get rebuilt. I'm going to do a video on that later. It sure beats paying for a car I don't have. So I'm just going to bite my tongue for now. We're going to sort the car out, figure what it's going to cost to fix it. So basically on the final day of this, it was like hour by hour, me pinging Clay, me calling Mr. Smith calling Clay. It was sort of a round robin, back and forth. And finally, Mr. Smith said, the money has come off the wire. It is confirmed in my bank account. I will be at my warehouse in 20 minutes to open it up. How quick can you be here? I told him I can be out there in about an hour and a half. He said, well, I can't be there when you get the car, but Clay has agreed to hand the car over to you. And so, not knowing potentially what I was walking into, I knew the address of the building. We'd already scouted it. And so, all I told the crew in my car and my wife was, listen, I'm going to get out of the car. What I want you to do is I want you to back up. If something fishy goes down here, if somebody jumps out of one of those vans or comes out of the building, or if Clay's, upset with me and decides to come after me with a baseball bat or something, just call 911. Don't get out of the car. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. It didn't. It was a no big deal situation. I basically got out of the vehicle. I walked over to Clay, and he looked like a completely defeated individual. And he knew that I had just drug him so hard, because I warned him. He had almost 2 months to avoid this situation. But I told him, I said, once I start on this, I'm not the type of person who lets go. And I told him, I said, Clay, you like to play checkers and I love the game chess. And you just decided to play checkers with a chess player, man. And I beat you. And he's like, well, I hope you're proud of yourself. I was like, I'm not. I was like, Clay, you wasted so much of my life and so many people's time. Like, it wasn't fun. Like, all I got was a car back. Look how much time and money I've lost chasing it. And he's like, I'm really sorry I put you through that. And I just looked at him and said, you know what, man, have a good life. You've got problems I couldn't imagine. Like the way your life is about to go, man, your world is going to be upside down for a long time, Clay. And goodbye. Goodbye and good luck. And he stops and says, hey, can I get my dealer plates back? I was like, get your dealer plates back when I feel like sending them to you. And then he asked me one last thing. He's like, hey, can you sign off that you received the car in good condition and that you don't have any disputes with the car? And I was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The car hasn't been in my possession for 5 months. I don't know what's been done to this car. Yeah, it runs and drives right now. I'm going to drive it home, but it's going to go to a mechanic. It's going to get looked at. And sure enough, now I see why he wanted me to sign it off. But guys, that's my whole story. That's what happened. I got the car back. Everybody got paid off on that one. So if you were paying attention, my one car deal, I'm one guy consigning a car, that actually involved 3 people, 2 cars, 4 banks, and 1 prick of a dealership owner.
Dan, thank you. My wife and I would like to thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Dan.
And Operation fucking Sting the Stinger, man. We took down the con man, and the game has only just begun. Let's finish this thing. Let's help some folks out. I'll talk to you very soon.